Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Richard Esposito, who's written a book that's just come out, which is a biography of Jimmy Breslin. Some of you younger people may not know who he was, but he was a legendary columnist in the city of New York and I guess elsewhere. And anyway, tell me a bit about why you decided to write a book about him. Wasn't there enough books already written about him?
Well, Dan, that's interesting. No one had ever written a book about Jimmy Breslin and his career, which was spanned 50 years in journalism in the country. So one of the reasons I chose to write it was I felt it needed to be written since his role was pivotal.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about yourself. You've written in several other books, and you've worked on television.
Yeah, don't hold that against me. I met Jimmy when I was 22, and I started in journalism as a copy boy, as they used to call it, at the New York Daily News. I love journalism, and from there I went on to a long career as what used to be called a print journalist back when most people got their news from newspapers. I became the city editor of Newsday in New York, and then went on to edit the Sunday News, which was, pretty big newspaper. The second part of my career was in network TV, where I had the real privilege to be hired by NBC News to build their modern investigative unit, which we did very successfully. It was more than 30 people, and we had a lot of fun.
What when you say build an investigative group, what were you aiming to do? What was the goal?
That's a really good question, because in the modern world, you don't get to just spend a year on a project because no one's going to carry that budget item. So you look to build a unit that could break stories off the news and also have the kind of reporters that when a big story happens, let's say, Bataclan in France, or something at a shooting in the Midwest, that the people you have are capable of going out and getting more on that story faster than anyone else. So the Boston Marathon, we did a wonderful job at NBC News of being, first of all, accurate. A lot of people made mistakes on who the people were that did the bombing. We were careful. We did a good job. So in between investigations, that's what your unit needed to do. And they needed to work for digital, and they needed to work for network, and they needed to work for cable. So it's a big job.
So from that came the book called Bomb Squads, or Dead on Delivery?
So Dead on Delivery was based on the war on drugs. And I wrote that when I was at Newsday. And I covered the law enforcement beat for the paper. Then Bomb Squad came after 9/11. I was at ABC at the time, and I worked a lot for Nightline with Ted Koppel. And a publisher saw our documentaries on the World Trade Center and the Bomb Squad, and called and asked if we would write a book. And so my partner in TV, Ted Gerstein, and I wrote that book. And we went to bomb school. We rode around with the Bomb Squad, and it was a great journey.
Was this where you spent a year with them?
Yes. ABC was very kind and let me work from the Bomb Squad a couple of days a week. So I got to spend a year with them, go to the training things that they went to, ride around with them, learn how they do what they do, which is pretty impressive. And then the book has the history of bombs and bomb squads in the United States.
When did you first get interested in journalism? Were you doing that in high school? I guess, where were you from?
Yeah, so I went to Fordham Prep in the Bronx, and I apparently worked at the student paper a little bit. Then I went to NYU and I worked for the student magazine. Um, I went out to graduate school at Berkeley and I did a little work out there as well. Then I was offered a job at the New York Daily News and came home to New York, where I had the good fortune to, not a lot of people get to start at the Daily News, at a big newspaper like that. So I was pretty fortunate. And I took advantage of that luck over the years. I didn't waste it.
So let me go into what I remember. The people just loved Jimmy Breslin. They did, and he ran a column. And was it in the Daily News or in the Times? I don't remember where.
Yeah, well, Jimmy, over the course of 50 years, he worked at a lot of places. He started at a newspaper called the Herald Tribune. In fact, he was sitting 6 feet away from Tom Wolfe. The two of them started there together in 1963. One guy, a big Irish shamble, and the other guy, this fastidious suit-wearing, particularly Southern gentleman. And they did great work there, and which in Jimmy's case included covering the death of John F. Kennedy, where he wrote a story that is famous now called The Gravedigger. While 10,000 people went to cover the procession down Pennsylvania Avenue, he went and talked to the man who was going to dig the grave and spent his morning learning what it was like to be the man who would dig the president's grave. And that became a model for journalists. By the time I got to know him, he was at the New York Daily News, and he had just finished the reporting on the Son of Sam case, which, at the time was the biggest serial killer in the country.
Tell us about that case, because I think some of it, and toward the end of it, involved being Eastern Long Island. He was on his way here, I think.
That they didn't know where he would go next, but there was concern that he was going to come out to Eastern Long Island and, in fact, use a machine gun in one of the discotheques that used to be out in West Hampton and the areas out here during the 1970s. He had never used a machine gun before, and if you think of the havoc he would have caused doing that, so that was definitely on his mind, such as his mind was for a serial killer. And Jimmy wrote about all of the events. In fact, Son of Sam wrote him. He became his pen pal to some degree.
Well, so just to follow through on Son of Sam, he used to go to lovers' lanes at night and shoot people who were in the cars looking at the stars, and I guess what we used to call making out.
Right. They were careful at the time to not ever say that. They were sitting in cars and looking at the water. Is the way the newspapers handled making out. But he hunted down long-haired girls, young women, mostly with brown hair, as they were sitting in lovers' lanes or sitting in a car after going to a disco with their best friend. And he came up without saying a word and shot them with a 44 caliber handgun, which is quite a powerful gun. And he became also known as the 44 caliber killer.
How many people did he kill altogether?
I believe, Son of Sam, going from memory, 7 people killed, 13 people shot. That's 26 parents grieving and scared. And imagine all the other mothers and fathers in Queens, especially, as their kids went out on a Thursday or Friday night. Their daughters are going out and this guy's prowling the street to all the kinds of clubs that young people go to.
So were you reading his work at that time?
My mother had a candy store. I started reading newspapers when I started selling newspapers. So I read the Post, where there was Pete Hamill and Murray Kempton and Jimmy. And then later I read the News. And Jimmy just got to the News, but by then I was already in graduate school. By the time I started reading him at the News. Prior to that, he worked everywhere. So I was pretty familiar with him, yeah.
Was he, well, I forget what the word is, where his column would run in different newspapers around the country? What is that?
Yes, pretty widely syndicated. And as a result, he had national fame. in many ways, Jimmy covered some of the most powerful events of our era, of that era, the death of JFK, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the civil rights marches. And he did this, he never stopped working, and he did this all the way up through 9/11, through Occupy Wall Street, through the Crown Heights riots. And he wrote for Newsday on Long Island for the last part of his career again. So he was out in Suffolk. He wrote for that paper here.
What drew you to him as a columnist that made him famous and made you interested?
Well, he wrote beautiful, simple prose, for one thing, and he wrote in a way that captured the reader. And he wrote in a way that few did. And that's what compelled me. He and Tom Wolfe at the beginning in 1963 really were at the core and the start of what we call the new journalism, which was a much less distant third-person approach and tried to bring the reader close into the story. And, Pete Hamill and Gay Talese did this, but they really were at the outset, the two of them, sitting at the Herald Tribune, writing in a way no one but sports writers ever wrote this way. And you know how sports writers would get into the locker room.
Yeah.
That kind of journalism, Jimmy didn't think it was new. He said, all I'm doing is bringing back the old that people have forgotten.
I think that is true because I did a story not long ago about the first newspaper ever published on Long Island, which was published in Sag Harbor. And pretty much the editor would just say, here's what is happening as near as I can figure, or something like that. So it was his sort of essay. He had different things in it, but that went out of vogue, I guess, during World War II, when you had the pyramid and, some of the things that they taught at journalism school. I remember myself being told by a journalist, the teacher I had at one point, that if you ever see a giant 4-word headline on the New York Times, don't even read it, just run.
Yeah, that would be a big headline. In a tabloid like Newsday, the word would be war, and they do a 1-word headline. And then you should run.
Where was Jimmy from?
Jimmy was from Queens. He was a guy from a really poor neighborhood in Queens, whose mother was a school teacher and a welfare worker, whose father was an itinerant piano player who walked out on them when he was like a toddler. So he was raised by his mother. And that tells you a little bit about the kind of people he cared about, too. He saw those families in the boroughs of New York and as his readers. He understood them at the core because he'd experienced some of the pain that working people experience.
Can you give me any examples that stand out that you've written about in the book?
Well, in the book, I take the time to go through some of the big stories in his career. So one of the moments in his careers that is quite moving was Occupy Wall Street. So he was at the end of his career then, in his 80s, and he left his apartment to get on the subway and go cover this thing that everyone in New York was acting like these people were animals. He went to his closet first and took his notebook from Selma, Alabama, decades earlier, and opened it to the page where a young Black girl says to him, I know what they're marching for. Then he went to Wall Street and made the point that these people were sitting there for the same reasons, many of the same reasons people were marching in Selma, the 99%, not the 1% who own the buildings around Zuccotti Park. And that's how he wrote about it, while everyone else was writing about it like, when are the cops going to get him out of there? He went down there and explained these people, one woman was knitting, their children were there. They were there to make a statement about what they didn't have. just as, Black Americans didn't have full citizenship, essentially. They weren't recognized in the way that segregation limited their opportunities.
Give me another example from your book.
Yeah, so that's one example. Another example is the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra's son. Jimmy was in New York. The kidnapping was in California. He started writing his coverage when he landed in the airport. He was essentially, people been covering the story for a whole day before he got there. But he took you to the kidnappers' homes, the family, to see what made the kidnapper a kidnapper. He took you to Frank Sinatra Jr.'s home to see how his mother felt when a security guard put him in the trunk of a car to sneak him past the media to get him home. He covered it from every single angle, and he covered it not like he's Frank Sinatra, the star. He covered it like Frank Sinatra's family and the kidnapper's family. He made it a very human story, and you, of all people, know how hard that is to do. You do that every week for however many years now.
When you were growing up, were you, and I know you were interested in newspapers because your dad and mom sold them. Was there any other thing you thought you might become when you were in school?
The only thing I ever wanted to be was a writer from 12 years old on. My parents tried to get me to go to law school. I probably would have made a lot more money. As you can see, I studied literature. I worked at the student newspapers, magazines. It's really all I wanted to do. And it's pretty much all I'm good at. Yeah.
Have you ever won any awards for your writing?
Oh, yeah. I've won pretty much every award in journalism. Many of them I'm proud of because I won them in a group. And in the reality, as you know, is nothing gets done by one person. So I have a collection of Emmys, a George Polk Award for my investigations of the CIA, tiny piece of a DuPont Award for ABC's coverage of 9/11, a piece of a Pulitzer Prize for Newsday's coverage of the subway crash in Manhattan by a drunk motorman. But you know how people say they won a Pulitzer? 87 of us were on that story, and we all won it. The paper won it. And so, yeah, there were a lot of awards, but, the reward is doing it,
Yeah. Are you planning to write any new books?
Yeah, I really want to spoil all my weekends by writing another book. So, but I can never figure out how to do it and go fishing. But yes, I plan to write another book in the next year or two. I'll start on another project. Yes.
Do you need to get permissions from where you're working to do books?
Well, now, yes, I used to. Now I work for myself, so I don't have to do that. But every employer was very good about that. Newsday was happy I was writing. ABC said yes right away. They all saw the value to them of having one of their reporters deeply involved in these kinds of topics because they knew it would come back to benefit them.
Yeah. What do you think about where journalism is headed? Is there any way that you see that others haven't been successful at?
That is the question that drove me to write the book in many ways. Where is journalism going? And what can a career like his do to inform young people? When Jimmy first learned about the internet, he called the office and said, "I'm done writing for you. I'm only writing for the internet now." He would embrace TikTok. He would embrace Instagram. He would embrace any form of storytelling because as far as he was concerned, tell the story, not what medium, any medium. So the future of journalism is not the distribution, it's the stories you tell and how you tell them. And so that's why I wrote it, because I wanted to show that people can learn from the past and put it into the present.
I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I'm pretty sure our time is up. I write down when it's supposed to end.
That's good. I'm really honored to be on. It's so great to meet you after all these years, you know.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I've been coming out here since I was a busboy at the Sea Spray Inn.
Well, yeah. Did you know that the man who headed up the Nazi landing for the Germans worked at the Sea Spray Inn?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's the guys that got here at Montauk. No kidding.
Yes, he and they were all the saboteurs had been living in the United States and were returning to Germany to be whatever Hitler wanted them to be.
Yeah.
And he had been a waiter, and he came out here in the summers, and he worked at the Oaks Inn, just to get your memory going.
Yeah.
And the Sea Spray.
Wow. You
And
know,
came out with his wife, who was an Italian woman.
huh, I had no idea. That's wonderful. I was about, I think, 15 when I got that job. And you know what, back then you had to find somebody to drive you to the Sea Spray Inn from wherever you were living, or they had a barracks for their help in the summer, you know?
Well, they became the cottages also.
Yeah, it did.
So
It,
what do you do when you're out here? I can extend this a couple of minutes.
I have a consulting practice, so I am CBS News' law enforcement analyst, and the Schneps people have brought me in to help them with taking the next steps in their publications and their site, working with their young editors and their young reporters. It's kind of wonderful because I can do a lot of work when I'm out here. My other clients are a music company in Los Angeles and a big company that does celebrities and brands in New York. So since basically what I do is give advice, I can do that from here. And they can see me just like you're seeing me. And then like once a week, I'll go into Manhattan and go to the office and see people there. And same with Los Angeles, but I'll only go out there about twice a year. You develop relationships. These people know me some of them know me for decades now. The people at CBS have worked with me for 20 years. So they don't really need to see me that often, you know?
Yes, that's the interesting part, I think, of the internet, in my view, is the lack of 3 dimensions.
Yeah, it's very hard to punch through in 2. But I make it a point to get to the places so I can touch and feel the people I work with. Otherwise, this would be pretty lonely, I think.
I think so. Well, we'll stay in touch. I'd like to do that.
I would love that. Just call anytime. I'm out here all the time.
Where do you live?
We have a house in Hampton Bays, and the working class Hampton, the last remaining one, I think. But it's a wonderful town. And a lot of my friends who I've known since I was a police reporter live out here, Commissioner Bratton and a couple of inspectors. So I have a bunch of friends out here and working reporters as well. So it's kind of neat. And, it's the shortest ride to the Hamptons from New York City. You go 1-lane road starting in June through September. You just get here in an hour and 45 minutes.
Well, we'll be in touch, and thanks again.
Okay, that's super.
Bye-bye.